Now, for at least the last 30 years, the suspicion that greenhouse gases were changing the climate and warming the earth has been in the minds of sensible scientists who have looked at the subject. And for most of those 30 years, there's been intensive research, enormous resources dedicated to the subject, to the stage we're now at, which is that about 98% of scientists who have studied the area believe that man-made greenhouse emissions are changing the Earth's climate and changing it at an accelerating rate and changing it in a way that is endangering civilization, literally. It's not going to be the end of the world will go on, but civilized society in the way we know it is absolutely threatened. Now, this is a scientific fact. It is not a matter to be argued about by shock jocks on the radio or disputed by born-again idiots in Parliament. It is a scientific fact. But we still find that an enormous amount of public space is devoted to people who call themselves skeptics or deniers, and are in fact loonies, who are prepared to argue against it. And we find as a result that public policy is distorted to feed the irrational prejudices and stupidities of people who simply do not accept reason, do not accept rational thought. And that is my big grump. And I'm going to, as I started with a local reference, I'll leave you with one too. There's a very topical one around here, which is a group of zealots and idiots called the Vaccination Awareness Network, who I call the child murderers of Bangalore. These are people who deny the efficacy of vaccination, which of course has been a fact of life for more than 50 years. And as a result, the number of this area is the least vaccinated of any area in Australia. And as a result, within the last month, 2 infant children have died of whooping cough in the area. And these were deaths which came about because the overall rate of vaccination in the area was such that an epidemic everybody had thought to be stamped out was able to take hold. The vaccination rate was so low that carriers of the virus became rife in the community. A totally irrational response, a totally unforgivable response. But this is the sort of thing which which is the result of this pseudo-postmodern belief that somehow the scientific method doesn't really work, it's only as good as anybody else's opinion. Bullshit.
David, you mentioned before the session you were worried we might spend too much time talking about things like soggy cornflakes. I hope your mind's been put to rest.
It certainly has. The disadvantage of following Mungo is that he's now said everything that I was about to say. And my grump is I never want to be on a platform after Mungo. Yes, human irrationality is a huge bugbear of mine. When I turn on the SBS news every night and see bomb blasts, killings, tribal hatreds, religious hatreds, the level of irrationality that seemingly is structured into the human brain, and Peter can talk more about this, is frightening. The fact that 60% of Americans claim that the world was created in 7 days by God or whatever is staggeringly frightening. As has already been said, evolution is probably the most tested and reliable theory that science has ever come up with. And as for the relativism of postmodern thought, I totally share Mungo's dislike. That if the Hopi Indians or whatever believe that the moon is made out of blue cheese, then that's just as good as any other group's explanation, and they should be entitled to have it. Or again, bullshit. Good on you for saying that. The moon is not made of blue cheese. And then the next layer of argument is, well, it mightn't be, but it makes them feel good if they all think it is. So they can wander around the tribe saying, gee, isn't the blue cheese looking good today? And they can all feel better about themselves. There is an objective truth out there, however much postmodern theory tries to deny it. Science is probably the greatest invention of the human mind. To think that it's just another belief system is ludicrous. What more can I say other than what has been said? But perhaps an extra gripe is the ease with which indifference sets into the human mind. When I'm watching the SBS news, it's not just tribal hatreds, it's poverty, dire poverty in 2/3 of the world, and affluent carbon-creating existence in the rest of the world. And nobody cares a damn. Well, not nobody. There are some charities that and some wonderful non-government organisations that try and address it. But yeah, I'm glad that Mungo started out on the major grumps. The minor grumps is the field of comedians, and I'm not a comedian. I don't get enormously upset when I pick up an apple and it's got a little sticker on it saying it's a Bangalow apple or whatever. I've heard a comedian do a 30-minute exercise on that and have the audience roaring with laughter, but it's really not one of my big bugbears, I'm sorry. So human indifference is another bugbear, how our cut finger matters more to us than the starvation of, or the massacre of thousands of people in various parts of the world. So human indifference, human irrationality. Are we doomed by the structure of our brain to always endure this, or is there something that could be done? Peter Singer has been trying to alert us to this for many years.
Well, if it's bad following Mungo McCallum, think what it's like following Mungo McCallum and David Williamson, who not only does the rationality stuff, but also goes on to the point about indifference and why don't we live up to our beliefs. Really you should have had a creationist or a climate skeptic or someone on this panel could have grumped in a different direction and you would have got more of a debate. But you're certainly not going to get that out of me. So my grumps tend to go along similar lines. I suppose I have a particular pet hate for people who criticise my works without having read them. And I have quite a lot of people in that category, unfortunately. They mostly read like a short quotation. Jacqueline, if you thought that quote, the sort of truncated quote that you read, misrepresented what you wanted to write, I have many examples of that where people have taken half a sentence and built it up into a presentation that this is supposed to be my view, when in fact if you read the whole sentence in its context, my view might be completely opposite or at least significantly different. So, you may know a little bit about my views. Some of you may have read several of my books, but those of you who have only heard about it at second hand, that's fine, you don't have to read it, but just, lay off until you have read it, please.